Bolsonaro was just found guilty by the Supreme Court. You've been very clear that you would apply sanctions. Are you thinking further sanctions to Brazil because of this Bolsonaro?
Well, I watched that trial. I know him pretty well. Foreign leader. I thought he was a good president of Brazil. I think it's a terrible thing. Very terrible. I think it's very bad for Brazil.
All right, well, that was our President Donald Trump, and he was reacting to the conviction of his friend and former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. He has been sentenced to 27 years in prison for plotting a coup. And according to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the United States might actually retaliate for Brazil's actions for the conviction, which is very interesting. We're gonna get to that a little bit later, but first, here is some background that you might need to know about Bolsonaro. I know it's been a while since we've talked about him. Well, he lost his re-election campaign to Brazil's current president, Lula da Silva, back in 2022. Bolsonaro and his allies undermined public faith in Brazil's elections, and meanwhile, they devised a scheme to stay in power that would have shuttered the country's Supreme Court entirely. It would have overturned the election result, and it would have handed power over to the military. So it's like a classic military coup. It gets worse though. His scheme involved assassinating Lula da Silva and also da Silva's running mate, and also the Supreme Court justice who oversaw the election. He wanted all of those people killed. The former president claimed that he never plotted to assassinate anyone, and he only wanted to correct a stolen election through lawful methods, is what he said. So a review of the election, however, that was conducted by the military found no evidence of fraud, and as we see now, he has been convicted for 27 years in prison for this. And in the past week, some of his allies have actually jumped ship, and they've testified against him, and that did not help his case at all. And his former defense minister was among one of those people, for example, and he's now claiming that he tried to talk the former president out of his plans, which were illegal. Let's see this, we have reporting from the New York Times that says he also faced damaging testimony from his personal secretary and records showing that the assassination plot was printed out and brought to the presidential palace, among other evidence. So Bolsonaro was still popular at the time with right-wing Brazilians, but his conviction in this case would render him unable to run for office ever again, and rightfully so, I think. You know, if you try to do a coup, you shouldn't be able to run for president a second or even a third time. Bolsonaro and Trump, of course, have been close for a few years. And Trump has tried his hardest to really tip the scales towards his former ally, tried to help him out a little bit. However, Trump has been unsuccessful in doing so, as we saw. So Trump slapped a 50% tariff on Brazil and placed crippling sanctions on Justice Alexandre de Moraes. And that is the judge that we mentioned earlier who oversaw Brazil's elections. And the Trump administration now is saying that they might even go further with their actions against Brazil. So yesterday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio wrote this on X. He said the political persecutions by sanctioned human rights abuser Alexandre de Moraes continue, as he and others on Brazil's Supreme Court have unjustly ruled to imprison former President Jair Bolsonaro. The United States will respond accordingly to this witch hunt. So, yeah, like Michael, you're laughing. I can hear you laughing next to me, and it's like, what are we doing? You know, like it's so obvious that, you know, Jair Bolsonaro, like the parallels between what happened in the United States on January 6th and what happened in Brazil. What was that, like the year before or something like that?
The year after.
Year after. Thank you.
Year after.
It's unbelievable, you know, the way that the Brazilian government was able to come together and say this is what it was. They investigated, they found out what was happening, what Bolsonaro was trying to enact, which was really, really terrible stuff. And you know, now we have this conviction that has come out after the investigation, after the trial, after everything. And he has been blocked from ever running again for president. And here in this country, we can't even get people to acknowledge that we had an insurrection at the Capitol, even though it was all on video. Everyone saw what was happening at the Capitol that day, and we still have people saying, oh, they were just tourists.
Yeah, God forbid you're held responsible for starting a coup. I'd hate to see that happen.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, it's ridiculous. And then for first of all, the president to say what he said is like, oh yeah, they'll, you know, like you just said, yes, the tariffs were a little less on Brazil. Brazil because this is his buddy, and his buddy did what he did but didn't get away with it. I mean, maybe not to the extreme level of trying to assassinate his opponent, but there is a printed record of it. And then Rubio saying that they don't like the outcome, Trump saying he doesn't like the outcome, getting involved and opining about a judgment in a court in another country is not the place of the United States, but there's no respect for precedent. I mean, you have to, from afar, at least respect the court of the other country. But when it's somebody who does and governs the way you did, then it's totally different. And then I love the he has to cast aspersions on the judge, human rights abuser, Alexandra de Moraes. So he's so upset about this human rights abuser, but let's just send a ton of money to Netanyahu to do whatever the hell he wants. But we're going to step in and say, no, this judgment that happened in Brazil is not right. It's unjust. It's terrible because this guy's a human rights violator. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's a clown show, and I don't think there's any impact that that sanctions or anything like that can have on Brazil that would change the outcome of this judgment. This is what happened, and this is the verdict, and that's it for Bolsonaro. Maybe he can appeal his sentence. Maybe he can appeal. I don't know how appeals work in Brazil, but that's the only way it's going to change is within Brazil, not because Marco Rubio sends a tweet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Maz, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I've always been a fan of Brazil and Brazilian culture. I love soccer. I love the dancing, and like I want to be. I think I want to be more Brazilian, and you know who I wish had been more Brazilian? Merrick Garland. I wish Merrick Garland had been half of what these people were. They sped through, they got it done. They got it done right. They got the facts. We got all the facts. We saw all the facts. And Yasmin, you're saying, how could you deny that January 6th happened? Well, there was the video of the back entrance where nobody was entering. And so that was the thing that they showed to go, look, there was nothing going on. It is ludicrous that Donald Trump did not have to pay the way that Bolsonaro is now for what he did. It's even more ludicrous that they pardoned all those nutcases who stormed the Capitol. You got to be out of your mind to storm a building, much less the Capitol. So they set all those guys free, and then the DOJ has gone in and purged all of the prosecutors who prosecuted them, who were doing their jobs. So it shows you the difference between a country like Brazil and a country like the US. And I would say democracy is stronger right now in Brazil than it is in the US. And Michael, your point is absolutely 100% right. How can any leader say, oh, because that side didn't win, now I'm gonna increase the tariffs. Now I'm gonna put my thumb on the scale. That just shows you, Trump knows deep down inside that he's guilty. But again, I think he's in such a delusional state, and he said it so much that he just can't show it. And this is when we see him react to something of this sort in the fashion that he does. You just see that he's upset that his buddy got a jail sentence for something that he knows he did as well, but won't admit.
Yeah, and I was laughing when you said, you have to be crazy to storm a building, let alone the Capitol. And I was just thinking, like most people have never stormed a building before. Like that's such a crazy mental image, and just like the energy that you have to be in to storm a building is funny to me. But also, you made a good point, when you mentioned that the Brazilian government is more democratic right now than the American government is. It's not even like, yes, that, right? But also the American people, right? We're the ones who reelected a guy who was, you can argue if you want, I know that there's a lot of different arguments as to Trump's direct involvement in inciting the insurrection. But we're the ones who watched the videos, who saw what happened, who saw, the posters that said, to hang Mike Pence and things like that. And again, you can say whether or not Trump was responsible for all of that. But we're the ones who, as a people, decided it's okay, put him back in office. We still want him there. And I say we, but it was like a third of Americans did. But either way, that's where we are, right? So however our democratic process worked or didn't work in 2024, this is where we are today. So You know, we'll have to see what happens with Lula da Silva's government because, you know, as we have covered here on TYT, he is a much more progressive left-leaning leader than Bolsonaro was. Bolsonaro was the complete opposite. He was quite far right-wing and he was dangerous, you know, like we were talking about paving over the Rose Garden earlier, and I told you, like, it hurts my heart. I hate it. And, you know, Bolsonaro was doing a lot to destroy the rainforest. And that is something that doesn't just affect Brazilians, it affects all of us, right? It affects our entire planet. And he was really just advocating for, you know, taking more of those trees down for whatever reason, developing it. Also, there are people who live there, there are animals and ecosystems there, and I won't go too far off topic on that, but it was very, very sad. And you know, the fact that Trump is stumping so hard for this guy is very, very telling, but at the same time, he kind of has to, right? Because if he doesn't try to protect somebody like Bolsonaro there, he's almost saying, you know, that he condones it, I guess. You know, like he has to pretend like everything that happened in Brazil is okay. And also everything I did is also okay. So
yeah, and it shows like how important, if he's a good guy, if you're a good guy in Trump's mind, you can't do anything bad, right? Nothing can be done that's bad. And so I don't know, you know, Trump saying, I don't know about that Brazilian court, doubting it, that this is a good guy and it was a witch hunt, according to Marco Rubio, who I'm sure followed that trial with a fine eye. So it's crazy.
The only time that Trump, he doesn't acknowledge that people are bad, his friends. He'll just be like, we weren't really actually friends. I don't really know that guy. He does that. So.
Guy named Jeff.
And Yasmin, you said what you said about how you can debate, you know, what involvement Trump had or didn't have. We saw with our own eyes, or we heard at least, him asking the guy in Georgia to find him 11,400 votes, whatever that is. And for a country to hear a guy do that, and then for a country to see this guy sit by and not do anything when his mob is going to go hang Mike Pence and scalp, Nancy Pelosi, etc. For us to see that and then still vote for the guy, to me that shows how racist of a country we have. To me that shows how conservative and like far right Christian conservative people in this country, the hypocrisy that they have, that they would sit there and they would sacrifice democracy because this guy's saying, I'm gonna get rid of all the brown people and all the woke people and all the LGBTQ people. And so it's interesting to see another country actually do something about it.
Yeah, and you know, you were saying that we heard the phone call where he was asking for 11,000 votes from Georgia, and nothing happened to him as a result of all of that. And so then what happened again, just very recently, he called up Governor Greg Abbott in Texas and said, you know what, I just need you to find me this many more electoral seats. And that's what he did. So my state just got further gerrymandered into oblivion. So
every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.